On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 100 years ago, November the 11th, 1918, the Great War came to an end. It was a war of attrition, a war where there was a lot of fighting, but not a lot of forward movement, of progress. We know that during the First World War, tanks were introduced and trench warfare led to devastation throughout the continent of Europe. The carnage, it was unthinkable by any measure. Millions died. It was a pivotal moment in the life of the world, and particularly in Christianity. It gave an end to what was known as liberal theology and an idea that through human progress we could just make things better by ourselves, because in the face of this carnage there was a recognition that we mess up, and often we mess up deeply. The supreme confidence in human progress was, in the face of World War I, a reminder of the extraordinary depth of human brokenness, and it gave rise to another form of theology, of neo-orthodoxy, that reaffirmed that apart from God, we are nothing. That a God who affirms the beauty within us gives us the power to make a difference in the world around us. Yes, that there is something inside of us that is part of us, that is still more than us, that calls us to transform the world around us. And that when we lean on that power, when we trust in that power, we have the capacity to do great things. But when we separate ourselves and lean on our own power and our own might, we often go along a road that leads to destruction and carnage. You see, it was supposed to be the war to end all wars. But in many ways, this great war gave way to so many others. At the end of World War I, the world was worn out. It was tired. It needed rest. But still, that war to end all other wars led to World War II. And World War II gave way to the Korean War, and the Korean War to Vietnam, and Vietnam to the Gulf War, and the Gulf War to the wars in Afghanistan. You see, it is important for us to take a world historical view in our present moment where there are wars and rumors of war. On this Armistice Day, we realize that we are always, it seems, still fighting. Growth in militarism, and we constantly stand on the brink of war, and we're picking fights with Iran and North Korea. And then with this in the backdrop, it is not detached from the massacres that we see in California, in Pennsylvania, in South Carolina, and Connecticut. And to date, we have not made much significant progress to fight the rising tide of gun violence in our nation. You know, I am not a gender essentialist, which is a fancy way of saying that I don't believe that all women think or act one way, but I am mindful this day that our history shows us that we have been led into war, and this lack of gun control has been with men at the helm, under so-called leadership of men. Where am I going with this? In the midst of the carnage that we experience, the war and the rumors of war, in this, as we celebrate Armistice Day, Veterans Day, I am hopeful because of what I saw of what happened this past week in the midterm elections. And it tells me that the future might yet be female. and the future might be full of hope. Yes, that things are changing, and that I have been, and I'm sure that you have been inspired by the women who have triumphed this week, and there has been a sea change. In 1992, you know, the House of Representatives was only 10%, and now in January, we go into having nearly 25% of the House of Representatives being women. For that, we give thanks. And we say, yes, for that we give thanks. And we see something changing here at home. Our very own Ayanna Pressley, the first black congresswoman from this great Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That Kansas elected its first Native American congresswoman who's also a lesbian. That Minnesota elected the first Somali American congresswoman at 37 years of age. Oh yes, even in the midst of carnage, things are changing. In New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, at age 29, a Puerto Rican woman became the youngest woman elected to Congress. Things are changing, and I yet remain inspired by the Democratic candidate for the governorship of Georgia, Stacey Abrams, who would be the state's first black governor and who, in the face of extraordinary pressure, refuses to give up. She refuses to concede. She refuses to bend over. She refuses to roll over. In the face of injustice and voter suppression, and her opponent, who was a Secretary of State of the state, is her opponent and also the one responsible for the election. So she refuses, in the face of voter suppression, to give up and to give in, reminding me of that great biblical model, Rachel, who refused to be comforted in the face of injustice. When people told her, as she saw devastation in her land, they just said, everything's gonna be all right. Everything's gonna be okay. We're making progress gradually. But she refused, Rachel, she refused to be comforted as she pursued justice. Yes, Stacey Abrams is a reminder for us that, yes, the times are a-changing, and even when in our Commonwealth we tried, some would have us to step back, to take a step backwards, we overwhelmingly voted yes on 3. Overwhelmingly voted yes on 3, which is a declaration to say that all people, cis and transgender, are created in the beloved and beautiful image of a God who loves us. And we affirm their identity, we affirm their humanity and their seat at the table. Yes, I am inspired, brothers and sisters, because as the prophet Isaiah said, a new day is coming. A new day is coming, and it says, in days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains. And it shall be raised above the hills, and all the nations shall stream to it. And many people shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in God's paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, and God will judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate between the many peoples. And here's the verse. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and neither shall they study war anymore. Neither shall they study war anymore. Yes, the one in whose name we gather today, the Prince of Peace says to us that there is a better way, always a better way. Sure, that way is not easy. And I'm not suggesting that the pathway forward in faith is a magical solution. It's not some type of hocus pocus that instantly transforms our reality. But we still hold on to this hope that the way might not be easy, but it is the way that leads to life. The way of peace, the way of laying down and turning our weapons of warfare into pruning hooks, is the way to which we are called. And we hold on to this hope, and we cling to this hope. And it is in this hope that we might have the possibility to transform the world. The one who is the Prince of Peace calls us, "Come to me, all you who are weary of the war, who are weary of fighting, who are weary of struggling against neighbor, come to me. All you who are weary and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and you might find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy," says Jesus, "and my burden is light." We have been fighting, nation against nation, fighting sometimes even against ourselves. But there is one that calls us to a deep relationship with the one who loves us, who creates us, and who desires our wholeness, desires us to be at peace not only with our neighbor, not only at peace with God, but peace with one another. You know, peace is not simply the absence of war, but it's the presence of God. Not simply the absence of war, but the presence of a God who loves us, a God who showed up for us in the form of a human so that we might know the depths to which God goes in order for us to know ourselves in the midst of a broken world, to know ourselves as whole, to experience a reconciliation in our relationship, not only with ourselves, but with our neighbor, with one another, so that we might enter into a world, that we might create a world, that we might imagine a world, that we might step into a world that is not defined by war, but is rooted in the Prince of Peace. This is the message that Paul writes in the book of Ephesians, that we would end the division and that there would be one new humanity, all walking in the light of God, all marching towards that place that has been promised for us, where we lay down our burdens, down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. We're gonna lay down our burdens down by the riverside. And the Negro spiritual said, we're gonna study war no more. Does anybody know that song? That spiritual? I invite you to stand on your feet this morning, and we're going to sing it as we open the doors of the church, because it is